She was selling her wedding dress when he found her a starving woman hawking white silk for bread money, while her belly rounded with child. She didn't see him watching from the shadows of the trading, post his wild eyes drinking in her desperation like honey. But Ezra Blackwood saw everything, the way her hands trembled as she held up the gown, the shame burning in her cheeks, the careful way she protected her swollen middle. And when the merchant sneered and offered her pennies for what should have bought pounds, Ezra stepped forward like thunder rolling down the mountain. "I'll take it," Ezra said, his voice rough as bark scraping stone. The merchant looked up, startled by the giant who'd emerged from nowhere. Ezra Blackwood was a mountain made flesh, 7 feet of muscle and sinew wrapped in buckskin and bare fur. His beard hung to his chest, black streaked with early silver, and his hands could crush a man's skull like an eggshell. But it was his eyes that made people step back, pale blue like winter sky, intelligent and hungry in ways that civilized folks couldn't understand. The pregnant woman, Clara, turned to stare at him. She was small and fine-boned, probably 22 or 23, with auburn hair escaping her worn bonnet and green eyes that held too much sorrow for someone so young. Her dress was patched but clean, her boots splitting at the seams. Everything about her screamed desperation except her spine, which remained straight despite the weight she carried. "The dress," Ezra repeated, pulling a leather pouch from his belt. Gold coins spilled into his palm, more money than the trading post usually saw in a month. "Name your price, woman." Clara's eyes widened. She'd expected maybe enough for a week's worth of beans and hardtack. The gold in this stranger's hand could feed her through winter and beyond. But there was something in his gaze that made her skin crawl and warm at the same time. He wasn't looking at the dress. He was looking at her belly, at the life growing inside her with an intensity that bordered on worship. I was asking for $5, she stammered. Ezra laughed, a sound like boulders rolling down a cliff face. $5 for silk this fine? You're cheating yourself, little bird." He dropped 20 gold pieces on the merchant's counter. "Wrap it up." The merchant scrambled to obey, knowing better than to argue with a man like Blackwood. Clara stood frozen as Ezra approached her, the wrapped dress tucked under his massive arm. Up close, he smelled of pine needles and wood smoke, of wild things and untamed places. There were scars on his hands and neck, old wounds that spoke of battles fought and won against man and beast alike. When he leaned down to speak to her, his breath was warm against her ear. "You're with child," he observed, and it wasn't a question. Clara nodded, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. 7 months, she whispered. Ezra's eyes lit up like stars being born. "Boy or girl?" he asked, and Clara found herself answering without thinking. "I don't know. The baby moves a lot, kicks hard. My grandmother always said that meant a strong son." Something shifted in Ezra's face then, a hunger so deep and primal that Clara took a step back. But he didn't move away. Instead, he reached out slowly, telegraphing his intent, and placed one enormous hand on her rounded stomach. The baby kicked immediately, as if recognizing something in the stranger's touch. Ezra's eyes rolled back in his head for just a moment, and when they focused again, there was a terrible certainty in them. "Sons," he whispered, so quietly that only Clara could hear. "I can smell the sons you'll give me." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She tried to step away, but Ezra's hand followed her movement, not restraining but not releasing either. "I don't understand," she managed, though part of her did understand, and that part was screaming warnings she couldn't quite hear. Ezra straightened slowly, his hand never leaving her belly. "You're alone," he said, and again it wasn't a question. "The father's gone, dead or run off, doesn't matter which. You're selling your wedding dress to keep from starving, and winter's coming fast." Each word hit like a hammer blow because each word was true. Clara's husband Thomas had died 3 months ago when his horse threw him and broke his neck. The farm was too much for her to manage alone, especially with the baby coming. She'd sold everything else first, the livestock, the furniture, Thomas's tools. The wedding dress was all she had left. "Come home with me," Ezra said simply. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a signal fire. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This man, this wild thing from the mountains, was offering her shelter. But the way he'd touched her belly, the way he'd spoken of sons, there was something wrong here, something that made her skin crawl even as her empty stomach cramped with hunger. "I don't even know you," she protested weakly. Ezra smiled then, and it transformed his harsh features into something almost gentle. "Ezra Blackwood," he said formally. "I live up on Devil's Ridge, got a cabin big enough for a family. I hunt, I trap, I know every inch of these mountains. I can provide for you and the child." He paused, his pale eyes boring into hers. "Both children, all the children you'll give me." The possessive way he said it made Clara's blood run cold, but what choice did she have? Winter was coming. She had no money left after buying food with the dress money, and she was 7 months pregnant with nowhere to go. "I don't understand what you're asking of me," Clara said carefully, though she feared she understood perfectly. Ezra's smile widened, showing white teeth that looked too sharp in his wild face. "I'm asking you to be my woman," he said bluntly. "To give me sons. Strong sons who can survive in the high country, who can carry on the Blackwood name after I'm gone." He gestured around them, at the rough frontier town with its muddy streets and desperate people. "This place will kill you and your baby before spring. I can keep you both alive, fed, warm, safe." The words were a lifeline, but they came with chains attached. Clara looked around desperately, hoping to see some other option, some escape from this impossible choice. But the trading post was emptying as evening approached, and she could already feel the October chill seeping through her thin shawl. Her baby kicked again, hard enough to make her gasp, as if even the unborn child knew they were running out of time. "If I come with you," Clara said slowly, hating herself for even considering it, "what happens to me? What happens to my baby?" Ezra reached out and touched her cheek with surprising gentleness. His hand was rough with calluses, but warm, so warm in the growing cold. "You become mine," he said simply. "Your baby becomes mine. You birth it safe and warm in my cabin with a roof over your head and meat in your belly. And when you're ready, you give me more. Sons to help me work the land, to hunt and trap and build something lasting up there in the high country." Clara closed her eyes, feeling trapped between impossible choices. Stay here and likely die in childbirth in some charity ward, or go with this wild man who spoke of owning her like she was livestock to be bred. But when she opened her eyes and looked at Ezra again, she saw something that surprised her. Loneliness. Deep, aching loneliness that matched her own. "You've been alone up there," she said, and this time it was her turn to make it a statement rather than a question. Ezra nodded slowly. 15 years, he admitted. "Built that cabin with my own hands, carved out a life in country that doesn't want to be tamed. But a man can only live alone so long before the silence starts eating at him." He looked at her belly again with that hungry intensity. "I need sons, Clara. Need them like I need air to breathe. The mountains are no place for a weak man, and I won't live forever. I need boys who can learn the old ways, who can survive what's coming." Clara felt something shift inside her at his use of her name, though she didn't remember telling him what it was. There was something hypnotic about his certainty, his absolute confidence that she would give him what he needed. Part of her wanted to run screaming, but another part, the part that was tired of being afraid, tired of being alone, tired of not knowing where her next meal would come from, was listening. "And if I say no?" she asked quietly. Ezra shrugged his massive shoulders. "Then you say no," he replied. "I'm not a man who forces women, but winter's coming fast and this country doesn't care about your principles when you're starving." He stepped back, giving her space to think, but his pale eyes never left hers. "I'll be at the saloon until morning. If you change your mind, find me there." He turned to go, then paused. "Clara," he said, and the way he spoke her name made her shiver. "That baby you're carrying, it's strong. I can feel it from here. But strong babies need strong mothers, and you're not strong enough yet. Come with me and I'll make you strong. Strong enough to birth a dozen sons and raise them to be kings of the high country." With that, he walked away, leaving Clara standing in the empty trading post with $20 in gold and the most terrifying proposition she'd ever received. Clara spent that night in a flea-bitten boarding house, lying awake on a lumpy mattress while her baby kicked and squirmed inside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ezra's face, heard his voice whispering about sons and strength and survival. The man was clearly mad, but his madness came wrapped in promises of safety that her practical mind couldn't ignore. She was 7 months pregnant, nearly destitute, and winter was coming to a country that killed the weak without mercy. When morning came, she found herself walking toward the saloon without quite deciding to do it. Ezra was sitting at a corner table, a cup of coffee growing cold in his enormous hands. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over mountain peaks. "I knew you'd come," he said simply, standing to help her into a chair. And as Clara looked into those pale, hungry eyes, she realized that despite all her fears and doubts, she'd known it too. The journey up Devil's Ridge took 3 days, and Clara learned more about Ezra Blackwood in those 72 hours than she'd known about her late husband in 2 years of marriage. He moved through the wilderness like he'd been born from it, reading signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth that were invisible to her city-raised eyes. When she stumbled on loose rock, his massive hand was there to steady her before she even began to fall. When she grew tired, he simply lifted her onto his shoulders and carried her like she weighed nothing at all. But it was the way he talked to her belly that made her skin crawl and her heart race in equal measure. Every time they stopped to rest, Ezra would kneel beside her and place both hands on her swollen stomach, speaking in low tones to the child inside. "Growing strong in there, aren't you, boy?" he'd murmur, his pale eyes going distant and strange. "I can feel you listening, feel you learning the sound of your daddy's voice." Clara wanted to correct him, to remind him that this baby had a father already, even if Thomas was dead. But something in Ezra's expression stopped her every time. There was a possessiveness there that went deeper than desire, deeper than love. It was ownership, pure and primal, and it terrified her even as it made her feel safer than she had since Thomas died. On the second night, camped beside a stream that ran silver in the moonlight, Clara woke to find Ezra gone from his bedroll. Panic seized her immediately. What if he'd changed his mind? What if he'd left her here alone in the wilderness to die? She struggled to her feet, her pregnant belly making every movement clumsy, and called his name into the darkness. "Easy, little bird," came his voice from somewhere above her. She looked up to see him perched on a boulder like some great predatory cat, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Just keeping watch. These mountains got things in them that don't take kindly to strangers." Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "What kind of things?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Ezra's smile was all teeth and shadows. "Bears mostly, cats too sometimes. But the real danger's not the animals, Clara. It's the men who come up here thinking they can take what's mine." The way he said "mine" made Clara's stomach clench with something that wasn't entirely fear. She was beginning to understand that Ezra Blackwood didn't see her as a woman he'd rescued. He saw her as something he'd claimed, something that belonged to him as surely as his rifle or his hunting knife. "Have you ever had a woman before?" Clara asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Ezra dropped down from the boulder with fluid grace, landing beside the fire without making a sound. For a long moment he didn't answer, just stared into the flames with those unsettling pale eyes. "Had women," he said finally. "Town women mostly. Whores and widows looking for a night's comfort, but never had one to keep." He looked at her then, and Clara felt pinned by his gaze like a butterfly on a collector's board. "Never had one to give me sons." The hunger in his voice was so naked, so desperate, that Clara almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then he reached out and placed his hand on her belly again, and she remembered that she was carrying another man's child, a child that Ezra had already claimed in his mind as his own. "This baby," she said carefully, "it's not yours, Ezra. You know that, right?" His hand pressed a little firmer against her stomach, and the baby responded with a sharp kick that made Clara gasp. Ezra's eyes went wide and wild. "Feels like mine," he said softly. "Responds to my touch like mine. Blood doesn't always make a father, Clara. Sometimes it's choice. Sometimes it's need." The cabin appeared on the third afternoon like something from a fairy tale, tucked into a clearing surrounded by towering pines and granite cliffs. It was bigger than Clara had expected, built from massive logs that must have taken a giant to move. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and she could see a garden plot behind the house, empty now but showing signs of careful tending. A barn sat off to one side, and she could hear animals moving inside horses, maybe a cow, the comforting sounds of domestic life. "Home," Ezra said simply, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. He'd built this with his own hands, carved civilization from wilderness through sheer force of will. Clara felt a stab of admiration despite her fears. Thomas had inherited his farm from his father, had never built anything more complicated than a chicken coop. But Ezra had created this entire world from nothing, had tamed a piece of the wildest country in the territory and made it his own. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Ezra's smile was blinding. "Wait until you see inside," he said, lifting her down from his horse with careful hands. "Built it with a family in mind. Big family." The interior of the cabin took Clara's breath away. The main room was enormous, dominated by a stone fireplace large enough to roast a whole deer. Handmade furniture filled the space, chairs and tables carved from pine, shelves lined with books and preserves, thick rugs covering the plank floors. Everything spoke of patience and skill, of a man who'd had nothing but time to perfect his craft. But it was the bedroom that made Clara's knees weak. The bed was massive, easily big enough for 4 people, built from logs and covered with furs that must have come from dozens of animals. Above it, carved into the headboard, were symbols that Clara didn't recognize, primitive shapes that looked like fertility charms or protective wards. "I made that bed myself," Ezra said from behind her, and Clara could hear the smile in his voice. "Made it strong enough to hold a man and woman and all the sons they might create together." Clara turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Ezra, I need you to understand something. This baby I'm carrying, it might be my husband's child, but that doesn't mean I'm ready to. That we're going to," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence under his intense stare. Ezra stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. "Clara," he said gently, "I'm not a man who forces himself on women. When you come to my bed, it'll be because you want to be there, because you're ready to give me what I need." His hand found her face, fingers tracing the line of her jaw with surprising tenderness. "But you will come to my bed, little bird. Maybe not tonight, maybe not next week, but you'll come, because deep down you know what you are. You know what you were made for." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but the words died in her throat. There was something hypnotic about his certainty, something that made her want to believe him even as her rational mind screamed warnings. "What am I made for?" she whispered, hating herself for asking. Ezra's smile was gentle and terrible. "To give life," he said simply. "To birth sons who'll carry our blood into the next century, to be the mother of kings." His other hand came to rest on her belly, and the baby kicked so hard that Clara doubled over with surprise. Ezra caught her easily, supporting her weight like she was made of spun glass. "See," he murmured against her ear. "Even he knows, even he understands what's coming." That first week in the cabin passed in a blur of strange domesticity. Ezra was surprisingly gentle with her, helping her navigate the final weeks of pregnancy with a knowledge that seemed to come from nowhere. He'd never had children before, he admitted, but he delivered foals and calves, had watched the natural world give birth 1,000 times. "Birth is birth," he said when Clara worried about having no midwife nearby. "Bodies know what to do, just got to trust the process." He cooked for her, stews thick with venison and vegetables from his garden, bread baked in a Dutch oven that made her mouth water. He rubbed her aching back when the baby's weight became too much to bear, his massive hand surprisingly gentle on her swollen body. And every night, he'd kneel beside her bed. She slept in a smaller room off the main bedroom, a space he'd prepared for her without being asked, and sing lullabies to her belly in a voice like distant thunder. The songs were old, wordless melodies that seemed to come from the mountains themselves. And every night, the baby would settle at the sound of his voice, growing calm and still as if recognizing something ancestral and important. But it was the way Ezra looked at her that made Clara's pulse race and her cheeks burn. He watched her like a man starving watches a feast, with an intensity that made her feel beautiful and terrifying at the same time. When she caught him staring, he didn't look away or make excuses. Instead, he'd smile, that slow, predatory smile, and say something that made her heart skip. "You're blooming, Clara. Pregnancy suits you." Or, "Can't wait to see you carry my sons. You'll be even more beautiful then." The possessive way he spoke of future children, children that didn't exist yet, children that would require her willing participation to create, should have frightened her. Instead, she found herself imagining herself round with Ezra's child, imagining the pride in his eyes, imagining the strength of the sons they might create together. The thoughts came unbidden and unwelcome, but they came nonetheless, usually in the quiet hours before dawn when she lay awake listening to his breathing from the next room. The baby came 2 weeks after Clara arrived at the cabin, on a night when the aurora borealis painted the sky in sheets of green and gold. Clara woke to contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart, and her scream brought Ezra running from his room. He took one look at her doubled over on the narrow bed and scooped her up like she weighed nothing, carrying her to the main bedroom despite her protests. "Need room to work," he said simply, laying her on the massive bed with careful hands. "This baby's coming fast, and there's no time for modesty." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some dignity in this most private of moments, but another contraction hit her like a lightning strike, and all she could do was grip Ezra's hand and try not to scream. He stayed with her through 12 hours of labor, wiping her face with cool cloths, feeding her ice chips, murmuring encouragement in that deep, rumbling voice that seemed to calm even her birthing pains. When the baby finally crowned, Ezra's eyes went wide with wonder. "I can see him, Clara. I can see our son." The baby that slipped into Ezra's waiting hands was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a pair of lungs that announced his arrival to the entire mountain range. But what made Clara's heart stop was the way Ezra looked at the child. There was love there, instant and overwhelming, but there was also something else. Recognition. As if he'd been waiting his entire life for this exact moment, this exact child. "Samuel," Ezra said softly, cleaning the baby with sure hands before placing him on Clara's chest. "His name is Samuel Blackwood." Clara wanted to protest. She'd never discussed names with him, had planned to name the baby Thomas after his father. But looking down at the tiny face, at the way the infant's eyes seemed to track toward Ezra's voice even minutes after birth, she found she couldn't argue. Samuel fit. Samuel was right. "Samuel Blackwood," she repeated softly, and the smile that spread across Ezra's face was like sunrise breaking over the peaks. "The first of many," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead with gentle reverence. "Thank you, Clara. Thank you for giving me my son." 3 months passed like a dream wrapped in winter silence. Clara had never known peace like this, the deep, bone-settling quiet of snow-covered mountains, broken only by Samuel's soft breathing and Ezra's gentle humming as he carved toys by the fire. The baby thrived in the thin mountain air, growing fat and strong on Clara's milk and Ezra's constant attention. Every morning, Ezra would lift Samuel from his cradle with hands that could crush stone, but held the infant like spun glass, whispering stories of the high country into tiny ears that seemed to listen with impossible understanding. "See that peak there, son," Ezra would say, holding Samuel up to the window where morning light painted the snow-capped ridges gold and pink. "That's Eagle's Nest. Your great-grandfather used to hunt there before the white men came. Someday I'll take you up there, teach you to read the wind and follow the game trails." Clara would watch these moments from her chair by the fire, mending clothes or preparing meals, and feel something dangerous blooming in her chest. It wasn't love, she told herself it couldn't be love, but it was warm and sweet and terrifying in its intensity. But it was the nights that undid her. After Samuel fell asleep in his cradle, after the evening chores were done and the cabin settled into drowsy quiet, Ezra would sit beside her on the rough-hewn couch and they would talk. Not about the future, not about expectations or obligations, but about small things. The way snow fell differently at different altitudes. The stories his grandmother had told him about the old spirits that lived in the high places. The books he'd read during the long winter evenings of his 15-year solitude, Shakespeare and Dickens, and scientific treatises on animal husbandry, that had taught him how to breed stronger horses, better cattle, more productive crops. Clara found herself drawn into these conversations despite her better judgment, sharing her own stories of growing up in a city that felt like another world now, of dreams she'd had before marriage and motherhood narrowed her life to the width of a kitchen garden. Ezra listened to everything with an attention that was almost physical, as if her words were precious things he was storing away for later examination. And when she'd finished talking, when the fire burned low and Samuel's breathing deepened into true sleep, Ezra would reach over and touch her face with one calloused finger, tracing the line of her cheek like he was memorizing her features. "Thank you," he'd whisper, "for being here, for giving me a family." The gratitude in his voice was so raw, so genuine, that Clara felt tears prick her eyes every time. The turning point came on a February night when the wind howled down from the peaks like something alive and hungry. Samuel had been fussing all evening, refusing to nurse, crying in sharp bursts that seemed to echo the storm's fury. Clara paced the cabin with him, trying everything she could think of, but nothing calmed him. Finally, in desperation, she knocked on Ezra's bedroom door. "I don't know what's wrong with him," she said when he appeared, already pulling on his pants. "He won't eat, won't sleep." "Maybe he's sick." Ezra took the baby from her arms, and Samuel's crying stopped immediately. The sudden silence was so profound that Clara's ears rang. "He's not sick," Ezra said softly, holding Samuel against his bare chest. "He's listening to the storm, learning its voice." As if to prove his point, another gust of wind slammed against the cabin walls, and Samuel turned his head toward the sound with alert, intelligent eyes. "Babies this young can't focus like that," Clara protested, but even as she said it, she knew she was wrong. Samuel was different, had been different from the moment of his birth, when he'd opened his eyes and looked directly at Ezra as if recognizing him. "Come here," Ezra said, settling into the rocking chair he'd built during Clara's final weeks of pregnancy. "Both of you." Clara hesitated for just a moment, then found herself curling up beside him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as if it belonged there. Ezra began to hum, the same wordless mountain song he sang every night, and Samuel's eyes fluttered closed. But Clara found herself listening to something else, the steady rhythm of Ezra's heartbeat, the way his breathing deepened when she relaxed against him, the rumble of contentment in his chest that she felt more than heard. "This is how it should be," he murmured against her hair. "Father, mother, child. Complete." Clara knew she should pull away, should maintain the careful distance she'd kept between them for 3 months. But the warmth of his body, the safety of his arms, the perfect way Samuel fit between them, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never known she was looking for. "Ezra," she whispered, and couldn't finish the sentence because she didn't know what she was trying to say. Warning, permission, surrender. He understood anyway. His free arm tightened around her, pulling her closer, and when she looked up at him, his pale eyes were burning with something that made her stomach clench with want and terror. "I know you're not ready," he said quietly. "I know this is still Thomas's baby in your mind, still your first husband's life you're living. But Clara," he paused, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes, "I can wait as long as you need me to wait. But I can't pretend anymore that this isn't what I want. What I've wanted since the first moment I saw you." Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. "What do you want?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Ezra's smile was gentle and devastating. "Everything," he said simply. "Your body, your heart, your future. All the sons you'll give me, all the years we'll have together. Everything, Clara, but only when you're ready to give it." The honesty of it, the raw vulnerability in his admission, broke something open inside her chest. This giant of a man, this force of nature who could kill a bear with his bare hands, was asking permission to love her, was offering to wait as long as it took for her to love him back. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely audible over Samuel's soft breathing. "Scared of what?" Ezra asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. "Of disappearing," Clara said. "Of becoming just a vessel for your sons, a woman whose only value is what she can birth for you." Ezra was quiet for so long that Clara began to think she'd offended him. Then he spoke, and his words carried the weight of absolute truth. "You think I see you as breeding stock," he said. Some prize mare I've collected to produce foals. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Ezra's laugh was soft and sad. Clara, in 15 years of solitude, I taught myself to read Latin and Greek. I studied philosophy and poetry, mathematics and natural science. I built this cabin, this life, this entire world with nothing but my hands and my will. Do you really think a man capable of all that would reduce the most important person in his life to something so simple? He shifted slightly so he could look directly into her eyes. I don't want you for your womb, little bird. I want you for your mind, for your courage, for the way you sing to Samuel when you think I'm not listening. I want you for the questions you ask about the books on my shelves, for the way you've made this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to survive winter. I want sons from you because I want them to have your intelligence, your strength, your stubborn determination to protect the things you love. The words hit Clara like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs and the strength from her arguments. She'd been preparing herself to resist a man who wanted to use her, but she had no defense against one who wanted to cherish her. And if I can't give you sons, she asked, testing him. If Samuel is all there is. Ezra's hand found her face, thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Then Samuel is enough, he said simply. One son is more than I had yesterday, more than I ever thought I'd have. But Clara, his voice dropped to that whisper-of tone that made her skin tingle. I can smell it on you, the sons you'll give me, not just one or two, but many. Strong boys who'll grow up to be kings of these mountains, who'll carry our blood forward long after we're dust. The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat shooting through her belly, a responding hunger that she'd been trying to deny for months. You can smell it, she asked, and her voice came out breathier than she'd intended. Ezra's eyes darkened. Everything about you calls to something in me, Clara. Your scent, your voice, the way you move. My body knows yours is meant to carry my children, knows it like wolves know the moon. Samuel stirred in Ezra's arms, making soft baby sounds that weren't quite crying but suggested he'd wake soon if not attended to. Clara moved to take him, to break the spell of this dangerous conversation, but Ezra caught her wrist. Stay, he said, and it was barely a request. Please, let me hold both of you a little longer. Clara sank back against his side and felt something inside her chest crack open like an egg. This was what she'd been missing with Thomas, this sense of being cherished, protected, desired not just for what she could do but for who she was. Thomas had been a good man, a kind husband, but he'd married her because she was suitable, available, willing to keep his house and bear his children. Ezra looked at her like she was a miracle he'd been waiting his whole life to witness. I think, Clara said carefully, her heart hammering against her ribs, I might be ready sooner than I thought. Ezra's sharp intake of breath was audible over the wind. Clara, he said, and her name sounded like a prayer in his mouth. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. Once you're truly mine, I'll never let you go. The possessiveness in his words should have terrified her. Instead, it sent liquid heat pooling between her thighs. Promise me something, she said, looking up into those pale, hungry eyes. Promise me you'll still see me as Clara, not just as the mother of your sons. Promise me I'll still matter to you when I'm old and can't give you any more children. Ezra's hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back so he could look directly into her eyes. Clara Elizabeth Cooper, he said, and the use of her full name made her shiver. I swear to you on Samuel's life, on the lives of all the sons we'll create together, that you will matter to me until the day I die. Not for what you can give me, but for what you already have given me: hope, purpose, a reason to build something that will last beyond my own lifetime. He leaned down until his forehead touched hers, until she could feel his breath against her lips. You are not just the future mother of my children, little bird. You are the missing half of my soul. The words were so beautiful, so devastating in their sincerity that Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. Then yes, she whispered against his mouth. Yes, I'm ready. Make me yours, Ezra Blackwood, all of me. The first time Ezra made love to Clara, spring was breaking over the mountains like a promise kept. Samuel was 4 months old. sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside their bed, and the cabin was filled with the sound of snowmelt rushing down from the peaks in silver streams. Clara had thought she understood desire from her marriage to Thomas, but what Ezra awakened in her was something altogether different. Not the dutiful coupling of husband and wife, but a hunger so deep and primal that it frightened her with its intensity. He worshipped her body like it was something sacred, tracing every curve and hollow with hands that trembled despite their size, whispering words of reverence and need against her skin until she was gasping his name like a prayer. And when he finally joined with her, when their bodies found the rhythm that felt older than civilization itself, Clara understood why he'd spoken with such certainty about the son she would give him. Her body responded to his like it had been waiting its entire life for this moment, this man, this claiming that felt less like taking and more like coming home. Afterward, as they lay tangled in furs and moonlight, Ezra placed both hands on her still flat belly and spoke to the children that weren't there yet with the same certainty he'd shown when speaking to Samuel in the womb. "Rest easy in there," he murmured against her skin. "Your time's coming soon enough." Clara wanted to tell him it was too early to know, that one night of lovemaking didn't guarantee pregnancy, but something in her bones told her he was right. Her body felt different already, charged with new purpose, as if it had been waiting for his seed to show it what it was truly capable of. "How many?" she asked softly, running her fingers through his wild hair. "How many sons do you think I'll give you?" Ezra's smile against her belly was pure male satisfaction. "As many as your beautiful body can bear," he said. 6, maybe 7. Strong boys who will grow up to be giants like their father, who'll take wives of their own someday and fill these mountains with Blackwood blood. The image he painted should have overwhelmed her, but instead it sent fresh heat coursing through her veins. She imagined herself heavy with child after child, imagined Ezra's pride growing with each son she delivered, imagined the cabin filled with the sound of children's laughter and the security of a dynasty built to last. By summer, Clara's suspicions were confirmed. The morning sickness that had her retching into a basin before dawn was different from what she'd experienced with Samuel, sharper, more insistent, as if the life growing inside her was already more demanding than its predecessor. Ezra's reaction when she told him was everything she'd hoped for and more. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around the cabin, his laughter booming off the walls like thunder, before setting her down and dropping to his knees to press his ear against her still flat stomach. "Twin heartbeats," he announced after a moment of listening, his eyes wide with wonder. "Clara, you're carrying twins." The news hit her like lightning. Twins. 2 babies at once, 2 more sons for Ezra's growing dynasty. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a rush of fierce pride. Her body was already proving itself capable of giving Ezra exactly what he needed, and the look of worship in his eyes as he gazed up at her made her feel like a goddess of fertility, powerful beyond measure. The pregnancy progressed differently than Samuel's had. Where she'd been sick and tired with her first child, with the twins she felt energized, vital, as if her body was finally fulfilling its true purpose. Ezra barely let her out of his sight, hovering over her with protective intensity that would have annoyed her once, but now felt like the most natural thing in the world. He built cribs for the coming babies, carved toys and rattles from mountain ash, prepared everything they would need for the arrival of his second and third sons. And every night, he would kneel beside their bed and sing to her swollen belly. His deep voice weaving stories of the future, he envisioned stories of brothers who would hunt together, work together, build an empire in the high country that would last for generations. Clara found herself adding her own voice to his visions, talking to the babies about the father who was already planning their futures, about the big brother who would teach them the ways of the mountains, about the mother who would love them with a fierceness that surprised her in its depth. The twins came early, in the middle of a September blizzard that cut the cabin off from the outside world completely. Clara labored for 18 hours while Ezra paced the cabin like a caged wolf, his usual calm shattered by the sound of her cries. When the first baby finally crowned, Ezra's hands were steadier than any doctor's as he guided his son into the world. Marcus Blackwood entered life with a roar that seemed to shake the cabin walls, announcing his presence with the kind of confidence that would serve him well in the unforgiving mountain country. 10 minutes later, his brother Jacob followed, smaller but no less determined, his cries harmonizing with Marcus's as if they were already planning some coordinated assault on the world. Ezra held both babies at once, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, his voice breaking as he whispered thanks to whatever spirits had blessed him with such abundance. 3 sons, he kept repeating, as if he couldn't quite believe his fortune. 3 perfect sons. Recovery from the twin birth was harder than Clara had expected, her body drained by the effort of creating and delivering 2 lives at once. But Ezra tended to her with a devotion that bordered on worship, bringing her meals in bed, caring for all 3 babies when her strength failed, singing lullabies that seemed to calm even her own frayed nerves. It was during one of these quiet evening moments, with the twins nursing at her breasts while Samuel played with wooden blocks at the foot of the bed, that Ezra spoke the words that changed everything between them. "Marry me," he said simply, his pale eyes serious in the lamplight. "I know we've been living as husband and wife, but I want it official. I want the world to know you're mine, want our sons to carry my name with pride." Clara looked up at him, this giant of a man who'd given her more love and security than she'd ever dreamed possible, and felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it nearly choked her. "Yes," she whispered, shifting Marcus to one arm so she could reach for Ezra's hand. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll be your wife in every way that matters." The wedding took place on the first clear day after the blizzard broke, with only the mountains as witnesses and Samuel gurgling happily in Ezra's arms while the twins slept in a basket at Clara's feet. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promises of love and loyalty that seemed to echo off the granite peaks surrounding their home. When Ezra kissed her to seal their union, Clara felt something shift inside her chest, a settling that went deeper than contentment, deeper than happiness. This was rightness. This was the life she'd been meant to live, the man she'd been meant to love, the children she'd been meant to bear. As Mrs. Clara Blackwood, she was finally, completely home. That night, as they celebrated their marriage in the privacy of their bedroom while their 3 sons slept peacefully nearby, Ezra whispered against her ear the words that sent fire shooting through her newly awakened body. "How soon, do you think, until you can give me another?" He asked, his hands already mapping the changes pregnancy and childbirth had made to her form. Clara's answer surprised them both with its eagerness. "Soon," she breathed against his mouth. "Very soon." Winter passed in a haze of domestic bliss, punctuated by moments of pure chaos, as Clara learned to manage 3 babies under the age of 2. Samuel was walking now, toddling around the cabin on unsteady legs, while his twin brothers crawled after him with single-minded determination. The noise level in the cabin had increased exponentially, but so had the laughter, the joy, the sense of abundance that seemed to radiate from every corner of their mountain home. Ezra thrived on the chaos, his patience with the children seemingly endless as he taught Samuel his first words, showed him how to stack blocks, carved tiny wooden animals that delighted all 3 boys. But it was the quiet moments that Clara treasured most, the evenings when the babies were finally asleep, and she and Ezra would sit by the fire, planning for the future, talking about the children they hoped were still to come. "I want at least 6 sons," Ezra would say, his hand resting possessively on her belly even when it wasn't yet swollen with new life. "Maybe 7, enough to build something that will last long after we're gone." Clara found herself nodding, caught up in his vision of dynasty, of legacy, of a future written in the faces of the children they would create together. By spring, Clara's body had recovered enough for Ezra to begin his gentle campaign for the next addition to their family. He courted her like a man possessed, bringing her wildflowers from the high meadows, cooking her favorite meals, massaging her shoulders when the weight of caring for 3 small children became too much. And in the evenings, when the boys were finally settled for the night, He would worship her body with a reverence that never failed to leave her gasping and desperate for more. "You're so beautiful like this," he would whisper as he moved over her and her around her. "So perfect when you're soft and willing in my arms. I can't wait to see you round with my child again. Can't wait to watch you bloom with new life." His words, his touch, his absolute devotion to her pleasure and happiness made it easy to surrender to the future he envisioned for them. When her monthly courses stopped that May, Clara felt nothing but joy at the confirmation of what they'd both known was inevitable. This pregnancy felt different from the twins, more settled, more confident. Clara's body had learned what was expected of it and was performing its role with increasing efficiency. The morning sickness was minimal, her energy levels remained high, and the baby, for she was certain this time it was just one, seemed to grow with steady determination rather than the urgent rush she'd felt with Marcus and Jacob. Ezra was beside himself with happiness, his joy so infectious that even the older boys seemed to understand something wonderful was happening. Samuel would pat her growing belly and babble about baby in his limited vocabulary, while the twins, now walking and getting into everything, would bring her toys and flowers as if making offerings to the life growing inside her. "4 sons," Ezra would say every morning as he kissed her goodbye before heading out to tend the animals. 4 perfect sons to carry on the Blackwood name. The certainty in his voice never wavered, and Clara found herself sharing his confidence. This baby felt strong, determined, definitely male, another addition to Ezra's growing army of heirs. The birth came in the middle of harvest season, when the cabin was filled with the scent of preserves and the promise of a well-stocked winter ahead. David Blackwood entered the world with the same determination that seemed to characterize all of Ezra's sons, his cries strong and healthy, his grip surprisingly firm when he wrapped tiny fingers around his father's massive thumb. 4, Ezra breathed as he cleaned his newest son, his voice thick with emotion. 4 sons in less than 3 years. Clara, you're a miracle. She felt like one too, exhausted but triumphant, proud of her body's ability to create life with such abundance. As she nursed David for the first time while his 3 older brothers slept in their beds nearby, Clara allowed herself to imagine the future Ezra painted in his nightly whispers. More sons, strong and healthy. A dynasty built in the high country, a legacy that would endure long after she and Ezra were gone. It was a beautiful vision, and one that seemed well within her grasp. After all, she was only 26 years old. She had years of childbearing ahead of her, years to give Ezra everything he desired, everything he deserved. The thought should have intimidated her, but instead it filled her with anticipation. She was Clara Blackwood now, mother of the Mountain King's sons, and there was nothing in the world she couldn't accomplish. 5 years passed like seasons flowing into one another, each marked by the arrival of new life and the steady growth of Ezra's mountain dynasty. Clara bore him 2 more sons in that time, Thomas, born during a spring thunderstorm that seemed to announce his arrival to the entire territory, and Benjamin, who came into the world on Christmas morning like a gift wrapped in snow and starlight. 6 sons now filled the cabin with their voices, their laughter, their endless energy that seemed to bounce off the log walls and echo through the mountain valleys. Samuel was 7, and already showing signs of his father's size and strength, able to split kindling with a hatchet and track deer through the forest with uncanny skill. The twins Marcus and Jacob were 5, identical in appearance, but opposite in temperament. Marcus bold and reckless, Jacob thoughtful and careful, both devoted to their baby brothers with fierce protective instincts that made Clara's heart swell with pride. David at 3 was the climber, scaling furniture and fence posts with monkey-like agility that gave Clara gray hairs and made Ezra beam with paternal pride. Thomas at 2 was the talker, chattering constantly in a mixture of English and the mountain dialect Ezra had taught all the boys, his vocabulary already surpassing children twice his age. And baby Benjamin, barely 6 months old, watched it all with alert dark eyes that seemed to take in everything and file it away for future use. Clara had grown into her role as mountain matriarch with grace that surprised even her. The frightened, desperate woman who had knocked on a stranger's door 7 years ago was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more certain of her place in the world. Her body had changed with each pregnancy, becoming softer in some places, firmer in others, marked by childbearing but still beautiful in Ezra's eyes. He told her so every night, his hands mapping the familiar territory of her form with reverence that never dimmed. "Look what you've built," he would whisper against her skin as their sons slept peacefully in the rooms he'd added to the cabin over the years. "Look at the army you've given me, the legacy you've created. You're the queen of these mountains, Clara, and every man for 100 miles knows it." His words weren't empty flattery, they were truth. Clara had indeed become something of a legend in the territory, the woman who tamed the wild mountain man and given him half a dozen sons in as many years. When supply runs to town were necessary, people would stare at the Blackwood family with a mixture of awe and envy, watching Ezra lead his sons through the streets like a general with his army, Clara walking beside him with quiet dignity that spoke of absolute confidence in her position. But it was on an October evening, with the first snow of winter dusting the peaks, and all 6 boys finally asleep after a day of harvesting the last of the garden vegetables, that Ezra spoke the words that changed everything between them once again. Clara was mending one of Samuel's shirts by the fire, her needle moving in steady rhythm while Ezra whittled a new toy for Benjamin. The domestic peace of the moment was so perfect it felt almost sacred, a snapshot of the life they'd built together in their mountain sanctuary. "Clara," Ezra said suddenly, his voice carrying a weight that made her look up from her sewing, "I've been thinking." She smiled at the serious tone, so at odds with the small wooden horse he was carving. "Dangerous habit," she teased gently. "What about?" Ezra set down his knife and turned to face her fully, his pale eyes intense in the firelight. "About us. About our family, about what comes next." Clara felt a flutter of something that might have been anticipation or apprehension. "What do you mean, what comes next? We have 6 beautiful sons, a home that's bursting at the seams with love and laughter. What more could we want?" Ezra was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the flames dancing in the hearth. When he spoke again, his words were careful, measured, as if he'd been rehearsing them. "You're 31 years old, Clara, still young, still healthy, still capable of bearing children. But," he trailed off, seeming to struggle with something. Clara set down her mending, her full attention now focused on her husband. "But what, Ezra?" He met her eyes then, and she saw something there she'd never seen before: uncertainty. "But I find myself wondering if 6 might be enough," he said slowly. "If maybe it's time to be grateful for what we have instead of always reaching for more." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. In all their years together, through 6 pregnancies and births, Ezra had never once suggested they should stop having children. His hunger for sons had seemed as endless as the mountains themselves, his vision of dynasty always expanding to include more boys, more heirs, more insurance against an uncertain future. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Where is this coming from?" Ezra rose from his chair and moved to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his massive ones. "It's coming from love," he said simply. "Love for you, for the woman who's given me everything I ever dreamed of and more. Clara, you've borne 6 children in 7 years. Your body has done more than any woman should be asked to do, given more than I had any right to expect." He brought her hands to his lips, pressing gentle kisses to her knuckles. "I watch you with the boys, see how tired you get by evening, how your back aches from carrying Benjamin while chasing after the others. I see the lines around your eyes, the silver starting to thread through your hair, and I think, maybe I've been selfish. Maybe I've asked too much of the woman I love." Clara stared at him, speechless with shock. This was not the Ezra she knew, the man who had whispered about sons he could smell on her skin, who had spoken with absolute certainty about the dynasty they would build together. This was a different man, one tempered by years of watching her sacrifice her body again and again for his vision of the future. "You're saying you don't want more children?" Clara asked, and her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Ezra's thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "I'm saying I want what's best for you," he replied, And maybe what's best for you is to rest, to enjoy the sons we have instead of wearing yourself out creating more." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't have said whether they were tears of relief or disappointment. "But what about your dynasty, your army of sons? You always said 6 or 7. Ezra's smile was soft and infinitely sad. "I said a lot of things when I was a man alone on a mountain, dreaming of a future I wasn't sure would ever come. Now that future is here. Now I have everything I thought I wanted. I find myself wanting something different." He leaned forward until his forehead touched hers. "I want my wife to be healthy and happy more than I want more sons. I want to grow old with you, Clara, want to see our boys become men and take wives of their own. I can't do that if I work you to death trying to populate these mountains with Blackwood blood." The tenderness in his words, the genuine concern for her well-being, broke something open in Clara's chest that she hadn't realized was closed. For 7 years, she'd been so focused on being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect vessel for Ezra's dreams, that she'd forgotten to consider what she wanted for herself. "What if I said I wasn't ready to stop?" she asked quietly. "What if I said I wanted to give you more sons?" Ezra's eyes searched her face with intense scrutiny. "Is that what you want or what you think I want?" he asked. "Because, Clara, I need you to understand something. I fell in love with you before you ever bore me a single child. I love you now not because you're the mother of my sons, but because you're you. The woman who was brave enough to knock on a stranger's door in a snowstorm. The woman who trusted me enough to build a life in the middle of nowhere. The woman who makes this cabin feel like home just by being in it." His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't remember shedding. "If we never have another child, if 6 sons is where our story ends, I will be the happiest man who ever lived. Because I have you, and that's enough. That's more than enough." Clara closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in his words, by the realization that somewhere along the way, Ezra had stopped seeing her as a means to an end, and started seeing her as the end itself. When she opened them again, she saw her husband clearly for perhaps the first time, not the wild mountain man who had claimed her, not the desperate bachelor who had needed sons, but the man who had learned to love her more than his own dreams. "I love you too," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "And if you're asking me what I want—" She paused, considering the question seriously for the first time in years. What did she want? Not what Ezra wanted, not what was expected of her, but what her own heart desired. "I want to be your wife," she said finally. "Not just the mother of your children, but your partner, your companion, your equal. I want to watch our sons grow up without worrying about the next pregnancy, the next birth, the next risk to my health. I want to travel with you sometimes, see more of this beautiful country we call home. I want to read all those books on your shelves, learn the things you've learned during your years of solitude." She smiled through her tears. "And I want to grow old with you, like you said. I want to be the woman you turn to when the loneliness gets too heavy, not just the woman who bears your sons." Ezra's kiss was soft and sweet, tasting of gratitude and promises kept. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and spoke in the whisper of voice that had haunted her dreams since that first night in his cabin. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "We'll raise our 6 sons to be good men, strong men, men who will make us proud. We'll build a life together that's about more than just creating the next generation. We'll be happy, Clara, really, truly happy." Clara felt something settle inside her chest, a piece she hadn't known she was missing. For 7 years she'd been living in service to Ezra's vision of the future. Now finally she was ready to help him create a new vision, one that centered not on the children they might have, but on the life they could build together. "I love our sons," she said softly. "All 6 of them, but I love you too, Ezra Blackwood, and I think it's time we started living for us, not just for them." That night, as they made love for the first time without the weight of expectation hanging between them, Clara felt a freedom she'd never experienced before. This wasn't about creating sons or building dynasties or fulfilling anyone's dreams but their own. This was about 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting in one of the harshest environments on earth. As Ezra moved above her, whispering words of love and devotion that had nothing to do with fertility or childbearing. Clara finally understood what it meant to be truly cherished, not for what she could produce, but for who she was. Outside, snow began to fall on the mountain peaks, covering their world in pristine white silence. Inside the cabin, 6 sons slept peacefully while their parents discovered what it meant to love each other without conditions, without expectations, without anything but the pure joy of 2 souls who had found their perfect match. The wild mountain man had gotten his sons, but more importantly, he had learned that love was about more than bloodlines and dynasties. And the poor woman who had once knocked on his door seeking shelter had found not just safety, but a love that would warm her through all the winters yet to come. In the end, it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 10 years had carved their story deeper into the mountain stone. Clara stood at her kitchen window watching her sons move through the morning like forces of nature. Samuel 17, and tall as his father. The twins Marcus and Jacob 15 and inseparable. David 13 and fearless. Thomas 12 and endlessly curious. Benjamin 8 and absorbing everything with dark, intelligent eyes. Clara's reflection showed a woman of 41 who had lived fully and loved deeply. Every line around her eyes and silver thread in her auburn hair earned through joy and sacrifice. Ezra still looked at her like she was a miracle, but there was peace between them now, the deep contentment of a partnership built on friendship as much as passion. Sound of horses approaching broke her reverie. 3 well-dressed riders emerged from the tree line, their bearing suggesting they were accustomed to being obeyed. Clara stepped onto the porch as Ezra emerged from the barn, his pale eyes immediately assessing threat. The boys flanked their father with unconscious coordination while the younger ones gathered near Clara. "Morning," called the lead rider, a thin man with calculating eyes. "Would you be Ezra Blackwood?" Ezra nodded, hand resting on his knife handle. "I am." "You're on my land." The man's smile widened without warmth. "Harrison Cross, Continental Railroad Company. Your property sits in the path of our western expansion route." Clara's blood turned to ice. She'd heard whispers about the railroad's westward push, families forced from homes by progress and government seizure. "Not interested," Ezra said simply. "Route around us." Cross laughed like breaking glass. "The railroad goes where it needs to go. Your valley provides the straightest path." He held out papers. "But we're generous, fair market value enough to start fresh anywhere." Ezra didn't move. "My land's not for sale, never has been, never will be." Cross's tone took on steel. "The federal government has approved our route. If you refuse, they'll seize through eminent domain. You'd get a fraction of our offer." Samuel stepped forward, hand on his gun. "Mister, you just threatened my family on my father's land. That's a mistake." All 6 sons were armed now, comfortable with violence if necessary. Cross raised a placating hand. 6 months to consider our offer. After that, the decision gets made for you." That night the family gathered around the kitchen table like generals planning war. "We could fight," Marcus said with stubborn determination. Ezra shook his head. "Not against the federal government. They'd bring soldiers eventually." Clara spoke quietly from the window where moonlight painted the peaks silver. "There is no other mountain for us. This is where we belong, where we became a family. If we leave, it has to be on our terms." She turned to face them. "We take everything we can, memories, stories, knowledge. We go as Blackwoods, together and unbroken." 6 months of preparation and heartbreak followed. They sold what they couldn't carry, packed treasures, said goodbye to neighbors who'd become family. Clara walked every path, memorizing morning light through pines, wind through granite peaks, the absolute safety that had defined 20 years of mountain living. But Samuel surprised them all with salvation. He rode in 3 weeks before deadline, leading pack horses and wearing his charming grin. "I found us a new mountain," he announced. "Montana Territory, past the Canadian border. A valley that makes this place look small, with water and game and timber. And the railroad's not interested, too remote." Ezra's eyes lit with hope he hadn't felt since Cross's arrival. The journey took 3 weeks, testing every survival skill Ezra had taught. When they reached Samuel's valley, Clara understood his confidence. It was magnificent green meadows surrounded by skyscraping peaks, a river promising fish and water, timber for building, abundant game, and most importantly, the same isolation that had made their old home precious. "What do you think?" Samuel asked. Clara felt tears on her cheeks. This is where our next chapter begins. Ezra tightened his arm around her shoulders. "Home is wherever we are together. As long as we have each other, we have everything." They built their new cabin that summer, all 8 working together. By winter they had shelter, food, and hope. Standing in her new kitchen Christmas morning, watching her sons exchange father-carved gifts, Clara realized they hadn't just moved mountains. They discovered home wasn't a place, but the people you loved and the life you built through determination and faith. The railroad could take land, but never what really mattered. As Ezra wrapped his arms around her waist, whispering love into her ear, Clara knew their greatest adventure was beginning. They'd learned love was portable, could survive anything, overcome anything, build anything, as long as 2 people refused to let go. That was enough. More than enough. Everything.